afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority on Monday, the 2nd of October 2023. I'm Mayor Beck Thomas, chairperson of this afternoon's meeting, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the Palawa people, Tasmanian Aboriginal people, as the traditional owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we meet, this island, Lutruwita, Tasmania, and pay respect to elders past and present. Joining me here in Council Chambers this afternoon are my fellow Planning Authority members, Alderman Stephen King, Alderman Jan Dunsby, Alderman Josh Cockshut and Alderman Russell Yaxley. We also have our Director of Infrastructure and Works, Emilio Reali, and our Manager Development, Paul Garnsey, and a number of planning staff joining us who will present this afternoon. We also have members of the public joining us in Chambers, so welcome to members of the public joining us here, as well as members of the public who may be watching online this afternoon. The Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. The Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of Glenorchy City Council. Our meeting procedures this afternoon: first, the Planning Officer will present their assessment and recommendation and then answer any questions elected members might have in relation to the assessment and recommendation. I will then invite the applicant and any other interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting, and speakers are limited to 5 minutes. I will then ask the Planning Officer to comment on any matters raised by applicants or representatives. The Planning Authority will then discuss the application. For statutory planning applications, the Planning Authority will decide the application and the Senior Statutory Planner will explain appeal rights. And for planning scheme amendments, our Strategic Planner will explain the decisions being made by the Planning Authority and then the process through to the Tasmanian Planning Commission. Legal requirements this afternoon: when deciding an application, the Planning Authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, to consider representations received during the public notification period, and to make the decision by reference to the current planning scheme provisions. Our meeting rules are fairly simple. We just ask that everyone please comply with any direction given by myself as chairperson, and that we please respect other people's views and their right to have their say. So that covers off item 1, Planning Authority Declaration. Item 2 is apologies, leave of absence. We have none today. Item 3, pecuniary interest. Do any Planning Authority members or staff have any pecuniary interest on any items on today's agenda? No. Item 4 is confirmation of minutes. To have someone to move that the minutes of the Planning Authority meeting held on 4th of September be confirmed. Moved Alderman King, seconded Alderman Cockshut. Any discussion, Alderman King?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Any discussion around the table?
Good, thanks.
For me to put the vote?
Happy to put the vote.
Put the motion. I'll put the motion to vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Item 5, proposed use and development: staged multiple dwellings, 1 existing and 7 proposed at 2 Moore Park Drive, Glenorchy, and Peter Cody is our Planning Officer presenting this assessment and recommendation to us. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal is for a, would you mind to go? Thank you. The proposal is for a site at Moore Park Drive in Glenorchy to have the existing dwelling retained as a unit and for another 7 units to be built around that dwelling. The dwellings will be a mixture of 2-storey and single-storey, but both being around 3 bedrooms, open plan, kitchen, living, that sort of a thing. If we go to the next slide, the site presently with a single dwelling is about 3,200 metres squared, and the existing dwelling is rather large, and there's a number of outbuildings which are all proposed to be demolished as part of this application. If we go to the next one, you can see that the site is in the general residential zone. This gives you a good idea of how large the site is. It's got frontage at Hillcott Place as well as onto Moore Park Drive. The site is ranging from about 120 metres to 240 metres from the light industrial zone, and the open space zone is overlaid the Chapel Street Reserve. Go to the next one, please. Didn't come out as well as I had hoped, but on the left-hand side you can see a composite image which shows the proposal plan against the aerial photo. And so you can get a bit of an idea as to where one of the units is proposed to have an access off Hillcott Place. The rest of the dwellings are to have extended access from Moore Park Drive, creating this circular area which will house about 17 car parking spaces, and the one by itself will house another 2. This is an example on the right-hand side of the single and double-storey dwellings, which have been dotted about. If we go to the next one, please, Trevor. We can see here there are a number of considerations under the planning scheme for which we have discretionary powers, being setbacks and building envelope, site coverage, private open space, privacy for all dwellings, and then the latter 3 move into the codes of the scheme, for which I'm relying on our referrals for the engineer and also for our environmental health officer, one being pedestrian access, the other being traffic generation, that's at the Moore Park Drive crossover, and for a sensitive use within an attenuation area relating to the proximity to industrial activities at Jackson Street and also to the waste transfer station. If we move to the next one, please, Trevor. So Unit 4, which is at the northeast corner of the site, invokes discretionary consideration for something which is fairly minor, but not minor enough to consider as a minor protrusion, and that is that the portico to the fore of the building is set back only 3.5 metres, the acceptable solution requiring 4.5. I think, though, that appreciating it is only an entrance to the dwelling, it's a fairly modest size, and the bulk of the dwelling is sitting at 4.5 metres. When we have the performance criteria asking for compatibility with the streetscape, I can't find that it's incompatible. And so for that reason, I believe that the unit complies. If we look at the picture on the right-hand side, this was a bit more of a moderate to great protrusion from the envelope. This is Unit 3, which is up in the northeast corner. That I couldn't consider that it would comply, and as you would have understood from reading the report, because this deck also introduces consideration with regards to overlooking, it's a condition of approval that the deck be removed. By removing the deck, you can imagine that the roof will come down. It'll be much the same as the covered entrance for the other dwelling. Will fit fairly well within the building envelope, removing the bulk protrusion and removing the privacy standard. I spoke with the designer. He was perfectly happy with that. It was simply a matter of these dwellings being of a sort of a standard design, plotted as best as they could be on the site plan. And then in reviewing them, this doesn't quite work, but it's not beyond us to condition such a thing. So for that, I believe that the proposal complies. If we go to the next one, please, Trevor. Unit 1, which is over toward the Hillcott Place entrance, there's a discretionary consideration because the total area of private open space doesn't equal greater than or 60 metres squared and greater. It's in a perfectly good spot because it's got a lot of solar access, but in looking at the way that the internal layout meets with the private open space, it would be somewhat inconvenient, and we have to have regard to the private open space being conveniently located in regard to a living area. And so again, I spoke with the designer and suggested that a door be put in, which would be near the kitchen, not the kitchen wall, but there's another wall sort of running off to the kitchen. If you were to put a door there, you'd have perfect direct access to the private open space. So again, by including a condition, then this proposal will comply perfectly well with the standard. If we move to the next one, please, Trevor. This is the privacy standard. So A1 is about overlooking. And so again, I've addressed that by requiring that the deck be deleted. So there will be no instance of overlooking from that to the adjoining properties in Paringa Road. And when we look at the other, which is A3, that relates to shared driveways, access ways in relation to windows. And so you can see in the photograph that I took, the two smaller windows in the centre are for a bathroom, and then the larger windows either side are for bedrooms. So with the site plan, the internal driveway is only about 1 metre away from these bedroom windows. So we've drafted a condition that will allow for the curb at the edge of the driveway to be extended away from the building, thereby complying with the acceptable solution for those windows on the right-hand side. And for the windows on the left-hand side, because the curb can't be pushed out so far without then creating a bit of a choke point for the vehicles to then access the car parking, they'll need to erect a screen. But this is a much better outcome than just a standard screen all the bedroom windows, because you would end up screening the entire side of that building. So again, subject to recommended conditions of approval, the proposal complies with that standard. With respect to the if you move to the next one, please, Trevor. With respect to those other discretionary considerations relating to traffic, pedestrian access, the proposal was referred to Council's development engineer, who's endorsed the proposal with recommended conditions relating to the design, taking into account particularly pedestrian access, the low speed environment. And with respect to discretionary consideration under the attenuation code, referred it to our environmental health officer, who has advised that. And as you can see, this site is, though within the attenuation distance of activities in the industrial estate, it's of a distance separated by existing dwellings that it's not anticipated to cause an unreasonable impact. To that end, if you go to the next one, please, Trevor. The proposal was advertised. We did receive 2 representations. One representation related to the alignment of Unit 7. The representative suggested that the door perfectly aligned with their door of one of their units and that this was undesirable. I can appreciate that, but the door is to a finished floor level which is not greater than 1 metre above natural ground level. Having attended the site, the unit, which is at Moore Park Drive, but wrapped around further, it's actually set a little bit higher. So they probably have more of a capacity to overlook, and whereas the units to be constructed sit a little bit lower. Given the floor area complies with the acceptable solution, even if there were intermittent looking between people, it's not something which would preclude us from issuing a permit. If we go to the next slide, please, Trevor. The other representation which we received related to the siting of units on the northeast, particularly relating to the unit 4, which is to the front of the site. Now that's about 8 metres away from the boundary, so it more than complies with any setback requirements. And then with respect to unit 3, with respect to unit 4, by deleting the deck, even if that deck was replaced with a window, which is at 4 metres, it would also comply. So I did take those into consideration. Privacy really only came into it for the deck, and I think we've solved that matter. So next one, please, Trevor. So bearing all that in mind, the recommendation is approval subject to conditions. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions from planning authority members at this stage? Any questions?
Just one, the house is the old original Moore farmhouse, isn't it?
Look, I went there and I don't, it's certainly old. It's had a few goes at it. It had been built around within the fabric of that building. There's probably something rather old. I did notice there was an oak tree which looked to be about 100 and so years old, but we haven't got this place registered or entered into our local code, so there wasn't much to consider. I did look, and where they're proposing a bit of car parking is where the oak tree is. I haven't specifically said they're going to remove it. Whether it could be retained, it might be a nice idea. I wouldn't go so far as to recommend a condition, but if anyone were to ask me, I'd say it's a nice idea because it's a pretty old tree.
You hadn't had an arborist look at it though, we don't know what condition it's in health-wise or anything.
No, we've got nothing, and it's looked like it's had a bit of a tidy up a couple of years ago, and that sometimes can mean rot gets in. I mean, it's green presently, but I'm not an arborist either, and again, there's no controls, but if it could be kept, it's a good thing.
But we can't condition it. It's
No, we couldn't condition it.
No, okay, thank you. We did receive 2 representations, which planning authority members have received and read, but we don't have any representatives here this afternoon, but we do have the owner here. So I just wanted to confirm you don't wish to address the authority this afternoon. Okay, great, thank you. Well, if there's no questions, then we have a recommendation for approval subject to 17 conditions, some of which Peter outlined. Do I have someone to move this as a motion? Moved Alderman Cockshut, seconded Alderman Yaxley. Alderman Cockshut.
Thank you, Mayor. Very detailed report. I think all the concerns from the community members have been raised and all been sorted, so I'm very satisfied. I think it's a good thing, more housing in the municipality. Obviously, the deck was mentioned and the layout to the garden as well. So from my perspective, more happy to see it progress.
Thank you. Alderman King.
I'd just like to congratulate Peter on his concise, as usual, approach and helping us to understand this, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman King. Any further discussion? I'm too unsatisfied, as the report outlines, that the discretions that we've had to consider, we have information to demonstrate the performance criteria met in relation to those discretions we have received and certainly taken notice of the representations received. And as we heard, certainly there's been work done by Peter as our planning officer with the applicant to accommodate some of the concerns raised by representatives. I think that's really pleasing to see, and to make work with the applicant to ensure that the performance criteria are met, and I'm satisfied that that's the case, so happy to support this motion. There's no further discussion. We'll go back to Alderman Cockshut to close debate.
All good, thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. And Trevor, would you like to explain the process from here? Please.
The application has now been decided by the planning authority, and the decision has been to approve the application subject to conditions. The applicant will be notified of the decision and has 14 days to appeal the decision. The representatives will be notified of the decision, and they will also have 14 days to appeal the decision.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for coming. Moving on to item 6, proposed use and development, change of use to short stay accommodation, visitor accommodation, 15 Nathan Street, Berrydale. And our planning officers again are Peter and Yuvika. So,
Thank you, Chair.
over to you.
I'll present that, but Peter will jump in if we think I'm not able to answer something and missing out. This is my first one, so please bear with me.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So figure 1 and 2 is an aerial view of 15 Nathan Street, Berrydale. The proposal is to convert the existing residence to visitor accommodation. Next slide, please. Figure 3, 4, 5, and 6 is a general overview of the dwelling. It is proposed to change the entire residence, which spread over 3 floors, consisting 5 to 6 bedrooms. A living room has been converted into a bedroom as well, so what we're taking is at 6. Other amenities, again, spread over 3 floors. Figure 5 and 6 shows the existing driveway, and as you can see, it's really steep, falling from the street towards the garage. Next slide, please, Trevor. Slide 3 is an overview of how a Nathan Street is at present, going up from Chaddis Drive towards the Nathan Street. I've specifically shown a section of the street where the slope basically starts towards this cul-de-sac, ending towards the cul-de-sac. Yeah. Next slide, please. So the proposal was advertised for 14 days, where we received 7 representations. The proposal did not comply with the acceptable solution of visit accommodation and car parking number as well. Therefore, it was assessed against the performance criteria. The performance criteria of visit accommodation talks about 6 requirements, and I would like to discuss all 6 in detail because it's crucial in the assessment. The first one talks about the privacy of adjoining properties. The subject site is a standalone dwelling which has the private open space to the rear side. It also has a deck on the rear side of the dwelling with privacy screens. So it prevents the overlooking to the adjoining properties, therefore it was considered compliant. Requirement 2 talks about increase in noise. It was assessed comparing it to the residential character. So I understand that the noise in terms of residential and visit accommodation may vary, but the frequency of the visitors coming on this side, if it was to be changed to visit accommodation, would be higher compared to the residential use. Because of that, the noise would be more again because of larger groups which will be welcomed on site. That will basically add up to the noise, which might not be more in terms of residential use. Therefore, this requirement was not considered compliant for the proposal. Requirement 3 talks about the scale of the use. As mentioned before, the dwelling is spread over 3 floors. The area is 331 meters square, which is more than what the acceptable solution requires. Talking about the scale, as again mentioned, the number of bedrooms invites larger groups for gatherings like a party or a wedding or any function that would be can be hosted on this site. Giving the regard to the scale, the visit accommodation will promote a use which is out of character when compared to the other residents surrounding the subject site. Therefore, this requirement was also not considered compliant. Requirement 4 talks about retaining the primary residential function of the area. It is considered that the change of the use to a separate use class cannot logically retain the primary residential function. But it is noted that the particular requirement has no basis in the objective of the standard because visit accommodation is a permitted use. Therefore, this was considered compatible. Requirement 5 talks about the impact on the safety and efficiency of the local road network. The scale of the use and the nature of the driveway being steep will allow the visitors to rely on on-street parking, making the existing street unsafe for the other residents living around. This requirement was not considered compatible. Requirement 6 talks about any impact on the owners and the users right of way. And for the proposal, there's no impact on the owners and the users. Therefore, it was considered compliant. Next slide, please. Thanks, Trevor. Another discretion against which the proposal was again assessed was car parking numbers. So the applicant informed that there are 11 beds used at present in the visit accommodation because it has already been, it's already in use as a visit accommodation. So based on the requirement which says that either it's 1 space per self-contained accommodation or 1 space per 4 beds. So considering 11 beds, we would require 2.75 and we rounded it to 3 car parking spaces. Assessing the performance criteria for car parking numbers, there is no off-street public car park within walking distance of this subject site. The street has some on-street car parking spaces, as we have seen in the previous slide. I would like this to be noted, please, and I'm sorry, I'm going to read it from here. The steepness of the driveway, which was approved in 1991 to serve a dwelling, is such a grade, which is 30% more than what is acceptable, that it is unlikely guests who are unfamiliar with the site will park within the property and will rely instead on on-street parking solely. This is not considered to be acceptable outcome. Based on the combination of the slope of the site, which makes the existing car parking spaces inappropriate to rely on, it is considered that the proposal fails to adequately provide parking to meet the reasonable needs of the use. Therefore, the proposal does not comply with the applicable standard in car parking numbers as well. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, the proposal was advertised for 14 days, and through 7 representations, some concerns which raised were the unsatisfactory on-site car parking, which I have mentioned before, it's not reliable. Noise, privacy of adjoining properties, that the landlord is absentee, commercial use, that the visitor accommodation will be a commercial use and not a residential use. There's no intention of long-term rental, that the street is narrow and not safe for the use. Short-term accommodation already existing in the vicinity, council to draw a line for genuine home seekers. Considering all these concerns, the assessment has been thoroughly looked into, number of site visits were done, and the recommendation is to refuse the proposal.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair.
Any questions? Alderman King.
Thank you. First, before a question, very well done.
Thank you.
Very well done. Could have been your 50th time. That was wonderful. Good on you. Could you explain for the public and anyone might be watching, which is the public still, what the difference between residential and visitor accommodation is?
The difference between the
Residential and visitor accommodation.
So visitor accommodation is a short and a medium-term rental, which could vary from 1 day to a month. Maximum, I haven't seen anyone going beyond a month. Month is also the maximum, I believe I'm saying. Residential use will be someone who owns the property and is living in the house, or it could be long-term rentals ranging from 6 to 12 months or more than that.
So in essence, someone, if it was a residential, if it stays as residential, probably could have a number of teenage children, could have a number of cars, and we couldn't do anything about that, technically.
Yes, that's right. During the site visits, the existing residents on Nathan Street, everyone has on-street car parking, which has been confirmed as well. So I could see 2 car parks at least parked within the residential property of Nathan Street residences.
The visitor parking, we would expect a lot more parking. That's what we're trying to get across.
It could be, definitely, yes. But in this case, there's no reliance on on-street. It's acceptable if it's a little bit on-site and off-street as well.
Yes.
But in this case, it is 100% on-street.
Yes.
Uh,
We note that the garage is filled up with storage and not being used for parking, which takes away a couple of spots.
Absolutely, that's right as well. And if page number 12 of the report, if you would have noticed, that's a picture which is the current situation, which was presented by one of the representatives. So there were 3 car parks which were completely parked on street in that case as well. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Alderman Yaxley?
Through you. So I guess my question's around I guess there's a couple. Firstly, just in terms of the conversion of the bedroom, is that all compliant and is it an unapproved works? There's nothing outstanding.
Since it's existing, we cannot basically do anything, I believe, about it, but we did have a chat with the applicant and he is happy to lock that up room, but regardless of that, it's still a 5-bedroom.
Still fine,
Yeah.
Yep, okay. So again, yeah, great work, well done.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate how you've addressed each of the performance criteria. It enables us to get a really clear understanding, so thank you for that. So my only query and my question is around B, in terms of the noise. I can appreciate that there would be some comings and goings, with visitor, but if it was residential, for instance, if there was 8 uni students there permanently
Yeah.
renting it compared to, sort of coming and going, I don't think the noise would be any different. And, obviously I've got a large family, I've got 4 boys, so I can appreciate, Airbnbs are really hard to get a hold of, or any accommodation, in that side of things. But my boys, I'm confident, would be just as noisy being permanent residents or visiting. I'm pretty confident in that. So I guess my query around that in terms of the noise level being likely to be more, I'm up in arms. I'm a little bit unsure of, and in terms of obviously hiring and entertainment and things like that, in terms of the comments that was made in that, I think it's a bit of a stretch. I think it's kind of a bit of a road too far. There are a number of Airbnbs would have different policies in terms of noise and parties and no party, all those types of things. So in terms of I noticed that Airbnb have a community disturbance policy, so that would apply. So for mine is that I think it doesn't matter necessarily about what the size of the property is, but it's more about who the people are within it. And I think trying to correlate that noise increase is a bit of a concern for me. The parking, I can completely see. And so if the garage was used for parking, and so we've got to have 2 on-site parkings, would that change the recommendation?
Through your chair, I believe it will not. I did a site visit along with Peter, and Trevor did one as well. We took a ute, which is pretty big. We did not go down the driveway. So even if it's available, which the applicant has agreed he can, we believe people who are not familiar again with the site, I am not familiar personally, that was my few site visits. I would personally not take a car down that driveway if I'm not living down there.
Yes. Yeah. And I went there this morning, and I'm not sure I'd go down the green. So it is. So I can certainly confirm that there would have to be on-street parking. So I certainly agree with that.
Yeah.
That side of things. Even in the explanation on their listing currently, it sort of talks about basically using on-street car parking, which we need to have the 2 on the site, and so I completely understand that. You're asking me to?
No, I was just, so we're just asking questions at this stage, we're not discussing the application. So I guess you had a question about if the garage was used, would this change the recommendation? And I think the answer was no. But back to your other point around the noise being greater than residential, and it was sort of along the lines of what Alderman King was asking too, is perhaps the question framed up as what is it within the planning scheme that enables us to consider noise as a reason for permission or non-permission for visitor accommodation as opposed to for residential accommodation? Is that sort of where so we're saying it could be equally as noisy for as a residential household as it would be for visitor accommodation, but we're not going to refuse it for residential purposes because it's going to be noisy.
Yes.
So what under the planning scheme is it specifically that gives us the capacity to say, no, it might be too noisy, or it's likely, you've said it's likely to be too noisy. What is it under the planning schemes that gives us the capacity to refuse it on that basis compared to residential? And 2, how do we know, what evidence do we have to base the conclusion that it's going to be noisier than residential? Is that sort of what you're trying to?
Yes,
Yep.
yeah.
Because I think
Sorry,
that
because
goes,
I have gone around in circles a little bit.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, that's all right.
I apologise.
yeah, and sorry to
Because I'm
jump
trying
in.
to,
but-
no. It's certainly exactly that.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you say you wanted to?
Oh, so you're looking at it.
Absolutely, please. Is that okay?
Yes, of course, yes.
When we're assessing applications for single dwellings, the planning scheme doesn't require us and doesn't allow us to consider issues like noise that would be generated. Privacy, we certainly cover, and that's where we end up with screens on windows and things like that. But the noise that would be generated by a single dwelling is not a matter that we can take into account when we assess a single dwelling. when we're assessing visitor accommodation, the planning scheme does specifically give us the power to consider noise. And I think certainly acknowledge that in single dwellings across the municipality, there'll be a range from very quiet dwellings to incredibly noisy dwellings, but we can't regulate those in any way. When it comes to visitor accommodation, I think the thing here with noise is not necessarily the evidence that how this one may be run will be particularly noisy, but the actual capacity of this with the number of bedrooms provides for 16 guests. And I think we would come to a reasonable conclusion when you have the ability to accommodate 16 guests in one residence, that there would be a greater likelihood of there being periods of time where there may be more noise. The other thing with visitor accommodation is that when people are staying for a very short period of time, they have no connection to the locality or any real understanding of who their neighbours are or anything like that. So I guess they feel a little bit like when you don't know your neighbours, it's very easy to be, they won't get to know the people who are next door. So they won't necessarily exercise that level of consideration. Just a different impact from visitor accommodation.
Thank you.
One other quick
Alderman
question,
King?
maybe, and I've meant to ask this before, just back to the grading, you mentioned it was 30%?
It is 31.
31?
Yes, 30 to 31.
And so back in 1991, you're saying that probably, did I misinterpret? You're saying that probably wouldn't get through now, or?
I'll get a crow in the building.
Magpie's all right, Eddie, but not crows. Yeah, so the gradient, would that get through today?
Through the chair, we certainly wouldn't encourage that for a single dwelling. I think the real key difference is that if it's a dwelling that's occupied by somebody who buys the property, they buy it with the full knowledge that they're going to have to negotiate that driveway. The same if they rent that on a long-term basis. The real key difference here is that what we're saying is that for visitors who are being there for a couple of nights or maybe a week, they're not going to use that driveway to access those spaces in the garage. So even if they're available, you wouldn't be parking in the garage.
Yes.
The steepness of the driveway precludes any parking on the driveway. You wouldn't want to park a car there. So it's really, yes, it's something that we would accept, and it certainly exists and could function for permanent occupancy. But for visitors who are only there for a very short period of time, they simply will not drive down that driveway and
I
park.
just wanted to clarify that, because we have approved some pretty steep ones
Yes.
before, but I just want to make sure that 1991 to now, whether there's a difference, just based on the comments that were made, that's all. It's okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Alderman Yaxley, sorry, did you have any further questions?
Not this stage.
Any further questions from planning authority members? So it currently is used for a short stay without a permit.
Through the chair, that's correct, yes.
Yes. So that becomes a compliance issue, does it, or is it?
How is that so?
Through the chair, look, while there's a live application, we wouldn't normally take compliance action because there's a prospect that could be approved. Whether we need to take compliance action would depend on whether, if this decision goes with the recommendation today and it's refused and it's not appealed and they don't have success in an appeal, if they were to continue the use, then we would have to take compliance action in relation to unlawful use of a premises for visitor accommodation.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, well, we have a recommendation that a permit not be granted for the change of use to short stay rental visitor accommodation of 15 Nathan Street, Uredale, for the following reasons. 1, the proposal fails to comply with either the acceptable solution or the performance criteria of clause 8.3.2 P1 visitor accommodation, which is an applicable standard. And 2, the proposal fails to comply with clause C2.5.1 P1.1 car parking numbers, which is an applicable standard. I have someone to move this as a motion. Moved Alderman King, someone to second, Alderman Cockshut, Alderman King.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, thank you for a concise report, and your concerns to me are very real. We have to live with these decisions in the long term, and this, I'm accepting of the work that you've done. This is not like a 5-minute have a look, see, oh yeah, it looks a bit steep. No, we won't let you park there. This is an in-depth report that you brought to us, and I'm really grateful for it. So based on your recommendations and the site itself and seeing the site, I can understand where you're coming from. So thank you.
Thank you, Alderman King. Further discussion? Alderman Dunsby.
Yeah, thank you. Particularly the recommendation 2 resonates with me, the car parking numbers. If it was a more standard driveway, you could have considered potentially parking within the driveway. The fact these vehicles will be parked on a narrow street, and I've seen it happen in other areas where people think they'll compensate for that, and so they put their vehicle partially on the footpath, which creates a hazard for pedestrians as well, and people can't necessarily use the footpath as they need to. I think in this particular situation, with the number of bedrooms and that are there, that it certainly does fail to comply with that clause in that manner. So I am supportive of the recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Further discussion? No, I too am supportive of the recommendation. I must admit I did go back and forward with this over the weekend as I was reading the report and the assessment, and mainly as we've discussed and we've heard the questions answered around how is it, well, it could be just as noisy and they could have just as many cars in residential, but the reality is the planning scheme at the time this was approved as a residential dwelling didn't allow for that sort of discretion. We're not making a decision on whether it's residential use or not. So what we are considering is, does this comply with the planning scheme in relation to visitor accommodation? And what we've heard is the evidence there presented to us that it fails to comply, and I'm certainly satisfied with that. Proving, that parking is an issue. I think we've seen the photos. We've had a look, some of us, at the site, and seen that it does fail to comply with that. Car parking numbers, and particularly the grading of the driveway, as we've discussed, demonstrates that as well. Residential noise versus visitor accommodation noise, what evidence are we basing that on? I think, as Trevor has answered our question, and I think it's widely known that where guests come together in a large property where they don't necessarily have that connection to or knowledge of who their neighbours are, and us particularly as celebrating something, can lead to increased noise. And when you've got, if you're a residential area and you're having a once a year birthday party or Christmas celebration, and you probably invite your neighbours, where you're not necessarily going to do that for a visitor accommodation, and you might be seeing that in a residential area. You might be seeing that every week, because every week someone's coming to celebrate something. That's by nature of the accommodation. So I think, whilst there might not be sort of concrete evidence around that, definitely the noise is greater. I think that explanation that Trevor gave about that likelihood certainly does satisfy me more than I was sort of satisfied before of that. So I'm happy to accept, again, that advice and support the recommendation to refuse, noting that will be difficult for the applicant to receive that outcome, and we have certainly considered it on the merits. We have also received the 7 and read the 7 representations and considered those as well. Essentially what it comes down to for us is assessing, in our role as a statutory authority, whether or not it meets the criteria in the planning scheme, and I'm satisfied that this application doesn't, so support the recommendation to refuse. Any further discussion? We'll go back to the move. Alderman King to close debate.
Thank you, Chair. We don't take any decisions lightly in the planning authority, and certainly not one like this where it affects a person's potential income. And as I look at this, I think that this was built in 1991, not for the purpose of a business purpose, but for a residential usage, and up to 16 beds, was it? Did you say? Did I?
16 people.
16 people, 11
16
beds.
people. Yeah, up to, and I understand there are large families as well, but this is not deemed as a family situation. It's a planning decision. We're not retrospectively trying to approve something for a business purpose here, so I accept our advice from our planners, particularly in this case, and thank them for all the work that they've done.
Thank you, Alderman King. I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. It's carried unanimously. Moving on to our item 7, final item on our agenda, proposed use and development, demolition, sports club rooms and associated works for sport and recreation at 131A Alunga Road, Chigwell. And our planning officer, Angela and Sylvia, but Peter is presenting. So over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for noting that I wasn't the author of this report, but I have read it and agree with it, and I'm happy to present to it, and I'll answer any questions as best as I can. So Trevor, we'll start it off. So the proposal in its main is to develop club rooms at the soccer grounds at Chigwell. I'm certain that we're all familiar with where this piece of land is. But if we go to the next slide, we can see here a nice site plan which shows some of the works for the car park, the associated club rooms, which is in between the two fields. And this site plan, as mentioned in the report, specifically excludes some works which are scheduled for lights and other things. This is just to get the club rooms and car park happening. If we go to the next slide, Trevor. This is a rather good one where the red box on the right-hand side shows where the club rooms are going. There's an icon, which is your typical sort of Google Earth icon on the existing club rooms. And then you can see the cadastral layout is a little bit messy, where the access to the site really runs across Crown land as coming from Alunga Road. Now, the standard application of zones based off cadastral boundaries has meant that the access to this site has been zoned utilities. So this throws peculiarities in its assessment, where we have to assess sports and recreation as being appropriate in the utility zone. So that's why there's a lot of words in this report about how that all works. But in the simplest of terms, it's because they've got their access through there. They won't be playing sport in that part, but the development of the access carries with it that use class. So if we move to the next slide, next one, please. This is the sort of main planning consideration that is in the report that Sylvia authored. I think it's evident just looking at these two pictures that the use of that portion of land for sports and recreation, which is effectively to give access to the actual site, is completely proper, and we should be able to approve such a thing as it's recommended that it complies. If we move into, these are some nice pictures that Sylvia took, so we can see the access, existing infrastructure, and keep moving please, Trevor. Existing club rooms, and the next one. This is in between the playing fields, which is within the vicinity of where the new club rooms will go. Let me go to the next one, building site. That's the other access from Alunga Road, where there's some development happening at present. So here we go. So we're looking at the, go back please. Discretions and representations. So I think I've sufficiently covered off on the use table one. Pedestrian access relates to the number of car parking spaces, and that per the acceptable solution there ought to be a dedicated pedestrian pathway, which hasn't been proposed, but they do have a traffic impact assessment which says that due to the low traffic environment, that one is not required in accordance with the acceptable solution. We've had our development engineer, traffic engineer looking at this proposal, and they've endorsed it with recommended conditions of approval. So to that end, the proposal is considered to comply. And then we've also got the flood prone areas code, which if we go to the next slide, I think it's important to show that really it's a kind of localised flooding which has arisen because of the works to create the field. So this isn't as though in a rain event, you know, a rivulet is going to burst and go across here and it's inappropriate. So though it's mapped as a flood-prone area, our hydraulic engineer has had a look at it and is satisfied that the proposal can comply with the performance criteria, but of course it puts it into that discretionary consideration. So the proposal was advertised, and if we go to the next one, please, and then the next one again. Oh, there are no, there we go, yes. The proposal was advertised, but there weren't any representations received. I think that speaks to it being a rather sensible sort of a thing to have a look at, and so the recommendation is for an approval subject to conditions.
Thank you. Peter, any questions from planning authority members? Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor. Just regarding the access, so the access comes around and there's a bit of a pinch point. There's another boundary. It seems to be only like one vehicle can get through.
Yes,
So it talks about maybe having two-way. Would there be enough room that side?
when I looked at Sylvia's assessment, she did suggest that the reason the works are required is because they're widening that access.
Yeah.
I don't know how many metres it is. I've got Bree online and she may be better to answer that question about how many metres it is and is that suitable for two-way traffic, if you don't mind, Bree.
Thank you. Bree?
Yep, sure. This access you talked about, I just want to get this right. I mean, as in, it's in the plan showing may not be that clear, but if you look at the one on the right, I believe it is the two-way. It's wide enough for the two cars to pass, and that's why we put the condition in there as well. That the engineering condition for design construction of parking and driveway, that a 6 meter wide driveway is to be provided.
And to add through you, Chair, they've specifically annotated on their site plan for dual lane access, and then they've got a proposed security gate 6 metres wide.
Yeah.
So I think piecing all those bits together, it should be sufficient for dual access.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just the other question dovetailing with that is that there's another access down the bottom. I think we saw a photo where the building works were coming through, or there was some building works.
At the other site on the
Yeah,
Lunga Road,
the other
that's
side.
the
Could that be
115
used?
Lunga side.
Yeah.
As far as I know, because I'm looking at something else in this area, that site is being developed for dwellings, and I don't imagine,
The
I
other
see.
green.
Well, I suppose it wouldn't make sense insofar as where they're building their parking area to then have an access way running between the
Yeah.
fields. So I don't imagine they want to have a circular access, and if they've got the 6 metres, they're not obliged to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess also people are presently understanding that that's how you get to the soccer fields,
Yeah.
and it'd probably just be too much development for not
As long as
much
that's at
gain.
6 metres, like it's needed, that's fine.
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Any further questions? We have a recommendation that a permit be granted for the demolition, sports club rooms and associated work, sports and recreation, 131A Lunga Road, Chickwell, subject to 18 conditions. Should I have someone to move this? Alderman Yaxley, someone to second, Alderman King, Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so it's a great, it's obviously nearing that final stage for the development there, and it's great to see this will be a widely used space for our community up there. So it's great that everything's working and proceeding to the right outcome. So happy to approve the recommendations with the conditions.
Thank you. Any further discussion? No. I too am pleased to see this come to this stage and certainly expect the club the Metro Football Club out there will be very pleased to see come to this stage. I know there's been a lot of effort gone in from our council officers from across council to get this application to this point, given this is one of those ones where council is the applicant and also the authority. So looking forward to getting the project progressed. Certainly satisfied that the report demonstrates the 3 discretions that were triggered for this application have been met, and look forward to seeing it progressed. Anything to close debate? Alderman Yaxley. I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. It's carried unanimously. And that brings to a close our Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting on Monday the 2nd of October. Thank you to members of the community who have joined us in chambers. Thank you to council planning officers for their work on the applications and recommendations, assessments for our meeting today, and we'll see you next time.